Hello, my name is Joe, and welcome to my channel. Today I want to talk about a book that I've finished probably about 3 or 4 days ago now, and it's called Our Beloved Kin, A New History of King Philip's War by Lisa Brooks. Now, King Philip's War is an event that I knew nothing about. I grew up in Northern Virginia, and I'm getting the impression that maybe if you grew up in New England or Massachusetts, you would already know about King Philip's War and who King Philip is. He's also known as, first of all, there's a lot of names in here that I am going to pronounce wrong. I'm going to avoid pronouncing some of the tribe names, but I'm going to do my best. So the name King Philip is also known as Metacom. And I had never heard of Metacom. I had also never heard of, again, apologies if I get this wrong, but Weetamoo is another kind of leader character in one of the Algonquin tribes. And first I should kind of explain, if you've only heard the name Algonquin and you don't know who they were a language group of natives in what is now New England, next to also the Iroquois as another language group, many different tribes in each of those. But that's who they are. And King Philip's War, around the 1670s, the English settlers had been, obviously they were settling the New World. They were encroaching. They were using their farming, kind of how they farmed and how they kept livestock, to just encroach inland, over the years. And their way of farming and their way of life was just simply, for the most part, incompatible, especially farming-wise, with how the natives liked to farm the land. And so that's going to become important. Overall, though, I should say I'm glad I read this book, but I didn't necessarily enjoy it. But first, I'll talk about the things that I did like. One, I love that I was introduced to this subject. Again, I didn't know kind of who the Algonquins were. I did have to take a break and do some research a little bit on kind of what does the word Algonquin mean. I learned about the language groups. And I did find it fascinating when the author talked about the farming techniques and how the English way of doing things and the native way of doing things was just incompatible. I found that very interesting. But one of the things I wish the book did more was give an even closer look into the society. For example, if I've only heard the name Algonquin, I don't know what it is, she will often kind of throw these things in there. Philip, by the way, who we never are really introduced to in the book, she just kind of throws his name out there, Metacom, and I never really get a sense of who this person is. Now, part of the problem is that we call it King Philip's War, and it's for reasons that I can't really explain, again, because the book was hard to follow sometimes. That's really a misnomer. One chapter that I did really enjoy was kind of before the relationship between the natives and the English just totally broke down. They were actually doing something very interesting with education. Obviously, the English had created Harvard. I don't know if it's probably not Harvard University at this point, but they created Harvard as a learning institution. And they also created, almost as what I would call a prep school for Harvard, was the Harvard Indian College. And this idea was fascinating. The idea was that they would take a mix of both Algonquin students and English students, put them in one classroom together, and teach them Latin, Ancient Greek, and Hebrew, so they could read the Bible in the original languages. And the English students would learn an Algonquin language, and the Algonquin students would learn English. And she makes a point. In saying that in this one class she takes a look at, all of the Algonquin students they graduate from Harvard Indian College and then are educated afterwards at Harvard. And she makes a point to say that one of the English students did not graduate, or he graduated, but he was not accepted into Harvard because he did not learn his Algonquin language sufficiently. They also printed the Bible. Unless I'm misunderstood, this was the first printed book in the New World. Again, New World, it's new for the English, not for the natives. But in the New World, the first Bible was printed not in English, but in, again, I'm not going to try to say the actual Algonquin language, but it was in an Algonquin language. So I found that fascinating. So they had a printing press at the college as well, and they were a printing press. So that was really interesting, and it was a chapter that really did a deep dive and painted a picture of Harvard Indian College. I mentioned in previous videos, that's what I like about reading. I like when the author can world build if it's a fictional world, or they can, if it's a real actual event, they can paint that picture. You can feel that place, and you can feel that it was real, and it was real for these people. Unfortunately, so that chapter I liked, did a good job in that chapter. Instances like that where the author really paints a picture and you see the time and place, for me, were far and few between. This book is very, very well researched. Almost the final 100 pages of the book, about that much of the book is all notes and references. I mean, this author clearly did her homework, but there are many chapters where there is no narrative, or the narrative is so confusing and there's so many new people that she introduces in these events, the events themselves become meaningless. And notice I'm not even telling you what these events are because I can't remember. As soon as I read them, we were on the next thing, and it was a meeting being described, and the English usually were lying about what happened. And, I get the gist of each chapter, but I would just get lost in the details. And the narrative itself was just kind of lost. Sometimes for a whole chapter, I don't know what's going on. Now, she does mention in the beginning that it is a difficult story to follow, and you get the sense that previous histories may have oversimplified the conflict to build that narrative, and in building this narrative, they don't really tell the whole story. And but then again, it makes it not very readable. I should mention, speaking of previous histories, this I would consider a revisionist history, and if that word revisionist freaks you out, it shouldn't. With history, from what I understand of what the purpose of revisionist history is, say you have an event, and you have one group of sources over here, and it's shining a light on that event. Revisionist history takes another group of sources, generally with the New World, it's the natives, and you look at that event from their perspective, and you shine another light. And ultimately, by itself, this is a good thing. More lights mean you get more light shine on a subject, you get more perspectives, you get a higher resolution picture of that event. Unfortunately with this, and again, this might be me reading into it. Someone else might have a different experience, but for me, you would think that we want to get a more rounded picture of this event. You don't want to go biased in the other direction. And I couldn't help but feel there were instances where the author was biased a little more towards the native side, and you felt, okay, well, I felt as the reader, all right, bias is bad. Well, this is just bias from the other direction. For example, I have a couple examples. She makes a point to say that the natives, when they would engage the English, their aim was not to kill. And so you get this good feeling like, oh, they didn't want to kill. That's very nice. And she mentions this a couple times. And one of the times she mentions it, she then immediately says, well, except for the kid that tried to escape the house that they were burning down, and they killed him. And then they take the father of the family and they chop him up. And the family sees it in his heart. So it's like, well, that's pretty horrible. And I understand it's a conflict. Violence is going to happen. But there's other instances where she mentions, well, the natives, they took the English heads and put them on stakes, but they learned that from the English. And it's, again, I understand it's conflict. Both sides are going to commit violent acts. But whenever it's the native side, there's always, well, it is a conflict, a different time. They learned it from the English. But when it's the English, you always get the sense, well, obviously, this is, they're just awful. And again, they did awful things. The English did some horrible things. Ultimately, you can't... They were encroaching. I mean, come on. But you get the sense that it's weighted towards one end. Another example is there's a whole chapter on Mary... And again, I might be messing this name up. Mary Rowlandson. I had never heard of before. I grew up in Northern Virginia. I didn't grow up in in Massachusetts or New England, so I don't know these people. But from what I found out, is a very famous. She wrote a very famous captivity narrative. She was captured by the natives, and she was going to be used as a bargaining chip, to help end the war or to help get native captives back. And by the way, again, to sound like I'm think that, the English are the victim. No. They had Indian slave trades. They would capture natives, put them on ships, and send them down south and sold them into slavery. It's horrible stuff. There was also a horrible massacre where they killed hundreds and hundreds of natives. It was horrible. But in the chapter on the Mary Rowlandson's captivity narrative, I got the sense that the author just has contempt for this woman. And I think one of the reasons is because her narrative is one of the main early histories of this war, of an aspect of this war. Because she wrote, she was captive, and then after the war was done, she wrote about her story. And she is a Puritan woman. Puritan to me means, I don't know much about it, but I think very fundamentalist, I think fundamentalist Christian when I think of that. Again, I don't really know their theology all that well, but they had a we are God's people, and this is kind of like the new Israel in the new world, and it's our God-given right, to be here, and screw these natives is kind of how that thinking led. So this is a woman that grows up in this society with that mindset just all around her. Obviously, very patriarchal society. The author makes the case that the Indians are not so patriarchal. The natives have female leaders. Weedamo is one of them. She's a main player in this book. By the way, that was a fascinating part. I want to learn more about her. And I'm totally sold that the English histories completely write this native woman out. Probably because they can't comprehend that this woman is in such a high leadership position. They just don't perceive that, so they don't write about it. So obviously this woman Rowlandson, she's being held captive. She does not think very highly of the natives. She looks at them, down on them. She's superior. They are savages. Obviously this is not good thinking in the modern sense. However, she is still being held captive against her will, and her children are being held captive, and I still kind of feel bad for her. And the author it's almost as if the author expects her to just reach this moment of realization and be like, oh my God, I need to break free of these puritanical, patriarchal shackles, and obviously these natives are living in this much better model of society, and I should join them and happily work with them. And it's like, oh, come on. She's a Puritan in 1670. She's not going to think that way. Come on. And I just wanted to ask the author, like, what do you expect of this woman? She's being held captive. No, she does not like her captors. And why should we expect her to? So I found that chapter just a little strange. And I found myself rolling, like, of course this woman's not going to, she's hesitant to participate in living with the tribe. Like, of course she is. Or of course she's not going to help out. Anyway, so that chapter was a little strange. I had problems following the narrative sometimes. I felt there were too many details. If you are interested in reading a book on King Philip's War, I would recommend probably reading something else first before you read this. This would be a great second book to read. Again, I mentioned I felt like it was slightly biased towards the native side, so I would balance it out with maybe another history. I wish it were felt a little more rounded. But again, you might read this, you might feel totally different than me. I might be wrong. I don't know. I might just be reading things into it. I would definitely recommend reading, at least the Wikipedia article in the war. Know how it ends, know the basic story of it before you go into this, because sometimes she just throws you in the deep end, and it's kind of hard to follow. I wish there was a little bit more descriptions of the societies. Again, she explained the farming very well. I wish we just learned more of the societies. And I also wish she had stuck around with these engagements. Like she talks about the different elements of the troops kind of maneuvering and Sometimes I felt like the narrative, the actual conflict itself, was just completely lost. So anyway, I'm so glad I read it. Happy to have read it. Didn't necessarily enjoy reading a lot of it. But there it is. That's called Our Beloved King, A New History of King Philip's War by Lisa Brooks. And that's all I'll say about it for now. Coming up next, I have the book Hondo by Louis L'Amour for June on the Range. I'm almost done with that book. Should be able to finish it up tonight, and in a couple days I should have a video for you guys in my first actual June on the Range review. But that's all for now. Thank you.